Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're here for our Masterclass webinar on moving beyond umami to advance the vegan revolution. Today, you'll learn about CJ Bio's natural latest ingredient breakthrough and why it's good for your brand. We are joined live by Nancy Higley, a leading authority on regulatory requirements in food industry. She will be live with me at the end of the session to join in the questions and answers. We've recorded also a session with our colleagues in Food Scientists and Innovators, Paul Kim and Judy Kim. Please feel free to pose questions during the sessions throughout the presentations using the live chat function. We will have 2 formal breaks for addressing these questions, and we would look forward to giving you some answers that are helpful to you. So here, as an introduction, I'd like to share a bit more information about CJ Bio. As you now know, CJ Bio has developed the world's first and only natural vegan cysteine that's made without any artificial processes. This is a truly clean and natural solution for delivering meaty flavors and aromas to plant-based and savory foods of all kinds, including soups, sauces, dressings, and processed foods and prepared meals, including also the plant-based meat alternatives. The company's Blossom Park facility in Seoul is home to more than 1,000 scientists, of which over 300 are focused on flavor and nutrition innovation. In fact, CJ Bio is a division of CJ Group, a global company headquartered in Seoul, Korea. Our division has been a global leader in both human and animal nutrition for more than 60 years. The entire facility is designed to spark creativity and developing new solutions that represent shared values of our company and our customers. We have a long and impressive track record for commitment to developing natural, clean, and sustainable ingredients. We are 100% committed to join the plant-based and cruelty-free ingredients. In fact, we are an active participant in many organizations. These include the UN Stability Initiative, the Plant-Based Food Association, and many more organizations and regulatory bodies. So as you can imagine, CJ is focused on manufacturing food ingredients that are good for the planet. Today, we're here to talk about our breakthrough ingredient, FlavorNrich. It's all about creating good flavor while being good for the planet Earth, good for humans, and good for your business. The product FlavorNrich L-Cysteine is what you're going to learn about during this webinar, and you'll learn special about its ingredient, as well as we now managed to find a way to manufacture this ingredient without any artificial processes. And this is important because consumer demand and preference for natural products, transparent labeling, and plant-based foods is definitely real and rising. There is rapidly growing numbers of vegans, vegetarians, and flexitarians in this country. In fact, half of the country's roughly 36 million millennials are considering a plant-based diet. What's more, these people tend to prefer natural products, environmentally friendly as well. We're pushing plant-based food alternatives forward and rethinking production processes on these ingredients we make for products that are more natural than ever. Why? Because we're keenly aware that 70% of Americans prefer processed foods, and plant-based alternatives are included in this. Consumer demand for healthier processed foods made by natural ingredients and natural processes. Yet until now, it's been difficult enough to create these flavorful experiences Americans love in processed foods, let alone satisfying their rising demand for natural ingredients at the same time. Add to this the fact that recently converted vegans and vegetarians who tend to look for natural, cruelty-free, and environmentally friendly products, expect the plant-based products to taste meaty and full, flavorful. Now I'm going to share the session we've recorded with Paul and Judy Kim. They are 2 of our leading human nutrition and flavor experts. They're going to tell you more about cysteine, a key ingredient used in the Maillard reaction. The Maillard reaction is a process that is used to develop meat flavor, that packaged burgers taste grilled, meat alternatives taste meaty, and soup, sauces, dressings more flavorful, savory, and robust. So I will now turn you over to Paul and Judy, who will first address the process known as the Maillard reaction.
Yeah, the recent the reaction is on highlight. Yeah, some of you may be familiar with the Maillard reaction. This reaction is the basis for many of the flavoring industry recipe. So this reaction is chemical reaction between amino acid and reducing sugars, which gives a brown color and generates distinctive flavors to foods. So therefore, Maillard reaction's flavor is well known as a brown flavor, or it can be called as a cooking flavor because it can occur naturally during the cooking the process under the summer conditions. So we can see many Maillard reaction flavor occurs in foods such as seared steak, the fried dumplings, the cookies and biscuits, and many other foods undergo this reaction during cooking the process. Then suppose, could you tell me why it is important for the food manufacturer?
Sure. That's because the big manufacturers, they want make their products similar to being cooked in the smaller kitchens or natural processing. So these making sure that taste and appears like those is very important for them.
The cysteine is very important for the Maillard reaction process. The cysteine is abundant amino acid in animal sources such as the chicken, the beef, pork, and egg. The cysteine works the most crucial role as a flavor precursor to characterize the meaty flavor in the Maillard reaction process. To mimic the meaty flavor by using the Maillard reaction, the food scientists have used the cysteine to create the chicken, beef, pork flavor without no-meat condition. So among 20 amino acids, cysteine is the most important driver factors to lead the reaction process. So most recently, it has been the essential for the plant-based meat alternative and vegan dishes.
Yep. And the reason why the cysteine is so critical in this area is because although there are plenty of cysteines in the plant proteins, there are not much of the free forms like there are in the meats, the animal proteins. So what you need to do is the industry requires extra cysteine, especially the natural cysteine, to be in the system to create those flavors like the meat, beef, pork, and those meaty flavors. And that's the critical part of what cysteine plays in the Maillard reaction and or the creating those meaty flavors for the vegan or alternative meat area. Starting material is of course the plant-based product, and what you do is you use the fermentation to generate cysteine naturally, and it is therefore the vegan cysteine as well.
Well, thank you, Paul and Judy. Excuse me. We certainly seem to learn a lot there during this conversation. And I think really some examples there are the clean labels. 94% of people say it's important because brands are transparent about what is in their foods. Natural ingredients is also very significant. Natural, plant-based and minimal processing, right up there with the clean labels. And savory, vegan and vegetarian foods, 53% of Americans shop to a specific diet. Meaty and aromatic meat alternatives we touched on earlier, and a reminder is half of the 36 million US millennials are considering vegan, vegetarian and flexitarian diets. So now we're going to move on to some questions and give you the opportunity to ask those questions and us to provide some answers. If you've got any questions coming in. Yeah, just a reminder, there is a chat at the bottom there. If you have the chance to put your questions in, we can answer them now. We don't have to wait till the end. Or if you prefer to hang on there, then I will continue and we can move forward with Paul and Judy's next session. Yes, I see one question there for availability of samples. We actually have an email address for you at the end, and we will put you in touch via that address with your account manager or representative, and they can arrange samples for you. And I think we've got one more coming in here. What is the typical use level to use in meat alternatives? Well, that I think I'm going to ask one of my colleagues to answer, and we will get back to you in an email after the session, or I will answer at the end of this period in questions. Is it allowed in organics? Yes, it is the answer there. So that was nice and clear. What is the difference between this and other cysteine? I think there we're going to just get into that. So very prompt question. Thank you very much for that lead. Nice segue. So now we've had a few questions. I'm sure you can get some more to us for the end of the session. And it is okay. And Nancy is going to talk to you about the regulations closer to the end of this. So please stick around to listen to Nancy. She's going to be live, so your questions can be answered directly. And so now we're going back to the production process, and Paul and Judy are going to talk more about this for us. And essentially, they're going to tell us exactly what that question was. What makes FlavorNrich different from other cysteine?
So actually, in the past, the cysteine has been coming from animal sources. As I mentioned previously, the cysteine is abundant in animal sources. So therefore, the cysteine came from the acid hydrolysis from the animal, the parts such as feathers and the skin. Yeah. So yeah, these are the not vegan cysteine, it's animal the cysteine. And also this cysteine is going through the chemical reaction process. So the other manufacturing process of the cysteine is coming from the fermentation with the sugar source. So it can be the vegan cysteine. However, it goes through the synthetic process such as electrohydrolysis. Yeah, this process changes the molecular structure during the process. So this specific, the synthetic process is the electrolysis, which cannot be happen in the nature. So most consumers would not consider this electrolysis process as natural.
Yeah, and in addition to that, there's there are other elements to these animal proteins or animal sourced cysteines. Because of those raw materials for the animal cysteine is oftentimes acquired from the duck feathers, like Judy said, and some of the other animal skins, which have some issues by some of those people who cares more about the animal cruelties. So there are another part of those for the animal sourced cysteines.
FlavorNrich cysteine used only microbial fermentations by using of the vegan source, specifically the sugars, and also the natural process. So during the entire process, we do not use any synthetic process at all. The fermentation occurs in the nature, just as the cheese fermentation and brewer in making the beer. Yeah, something like that. There is no artificial the process. Yeah. So therefore, the differentiation about the FlavorNrich cysteine is the using the vegan source and plus entire the natural process. That is the main differentiations against the existing the cysteine in the market.
The cysteine has been made through fermentation before, just like Judy explained it. However, what we have done is, we have eliminated those questionable processes within the fermentation. I should say, the cysteines prepared through fermentation, and that takes, the technology to basically remove those questionable process within the fermentation, and then turn that into a true natural process. R&D team has worked on this for years, basically coming from our customers who's asking for these type of materials. And as a result, we were able to produce this and we were also able to protect it with many patents around it. So it is only available through CJ. Of course, our customers can now, claim it as a natural flavor. There are other cysteines available before, but there are still some questions around it. And this is the FlavorNrich cysteine is the only natural cysteine that we can provide to the industry. And by using the FlavorNrich, customers are now can claim that as a natural flavor without doubt. And not only we're doing that, as I said before, this is done by the customer's request. And CJ's, R&D team has been worked on for years. And as a result, what we're also doing is, this is not only for us, but also for the customers and, especially the CPG companies. And we also keep, researching more materials that has been questionable or not available in a natural form to the industry. Our researchers are working to make those materials in a natural way, especially using the fermentation technology. So as a matter of fact, some of the customers are started asking us those materials that has not been available naturally for us. And of course, we're right now working hard to answer those requests.
So actually, the CJ Bio has the very advanced biotechnology. So based on the technology, so we can design for the natural way of the production method for increasing the value to the customers. So with the natural ingredients. So yes, we have many the pipeline in R&D. Then so we are providing more the taste and more the delicious flavor and the textured ingredients and the natural colors and many the flavor and the taste solution. So with the natural, the process and natural the technology.
And just to add to that, clean label is here to stay, and actually it's expanding. And our customers, continuously trying to answer those consumer needs, whether it is through ESGs or the clean label products. What we're trying to do, the CJ Bio is trying to do, is trying to help our customers to answer those questions and demands by the consumers, and by creating more materials that is produced naturally, especially through fermentation technologies, and so that our customers can have a more cleaner labels and be able to provide the products that is the taste wise and flavor wise closer to what our consumers are demanding. So the CJ Bio is continuously putting a lot of investment into our R&D, and R&D is working hard to basically it's keying into those areas to answer those customers' needs.
Well, thank you, Paul and Judy, for that recording. But as you've just learned, CJ Bio's FlavorNrich cysteine is produced by using fermentation. And it is only fermentation that is used, no electrolysis. And as fermentation does occur in nature, as Judy was explaining, the process is completely natural, with no artificial stimulation by electric charge for cleaving the molecules. So I'm now joined by our regulatory expert and food scientist, Nancy Higley. Nancy will provide specifics and answer questions on what we mean by truly natural approach.
Thank you, Ross.
Welcome,
It's
Nancy.
my pleasure. Yeah, it's great to be part of this, and thank you very much for the invite. Over my 30 plus years in regulatory and product safety for the food, beverage, and flavor industry, There have been many opportunities to experience change driven by authoritative bodies, customers, and consumers. In order to adapt to those changes, I've used the term guardrails to represent the rules or requirements for various topics to ensure transparent operations within a zone that represents compliance as well as meeting customer expectations. So I'm going to go and present some of the basis of the guardrails that I've developed over the years for natural, followed by direct application to natural cysteine that's been developed by CJ Bio. So if we could have the first slide. Thank you. The next one, please. Next slide. Thank you very much. So the overall scope of a natural guardrail depends on what you're trying to say or claim and the availability of regulations for that specific terminology. So for example, you'll see and experience several terminologies on natural. You'll see natural, made with natural, all natural, 100% natural. You can also see natural as it pertains to a specific ingredient, a class of ingredients, and or a finished product. It's very important that when you look at using the term natural flavor, that you understand that the regulations are somewhat specific for that. And your guardrail needs to encompass that the fact that the regulations say that all ingredients that are functioning as a flavor must meet the scope of the regulation in order to be called a natural flavor. When you're labeling an overall product as natural, the regulations can be open to interpretation. But what is clear to me is that the burden rests with a company to assure that it is not false or misleading. To do so, you would end up with a misbranded product. So I believe that when you're trying to label something as an all-natural product, you enter into what I call the land of no. That is what you cannot have in your product if you're going to call your entire product all natural. So it's very important that you understand, as was what's happening in today's webinar, from your vendor, what do they look at when they claim something's all natural, and you have a really close relationship with your vendor to be able to ask those questions. So the next slide, please. So more of what I'm going to call that it depends. When you're making a guardrail, once you've decided on what you're making it on, in this case, we're going to be talking about a guardrail for how do you determine something is a natural flavor ingredient. You look to a couple sources. One is not only is there regulations and you get judgments from the government, but there's also non-government sources. And your guardrail obviously will look at the regulations for various countries that you're operating in. And they're fairly written from many countries like US, EU, UK, Canada, China, et cetera. But also within a specific country, some of the agencies might have nuances that you need to also include. So for example, FDA and USDA in the US have slightly different statements that they sometimes have made and interpreted. When I'm developing a guardrail, and when I did develop my guardrail for natural, I think it's important that you look at the various cases of enforcement. Some of these cases go back quite a few years in the US, and these are what are called the warning letters by the FDA as well as the NAD. And in looking at them, you get a very clear idea as to how those agencies react to application of the regulation or the interpretation of that regulation. Finally, I call these things guardrails because I think they sometimes need to change depending on changing customer and consumer perceptions. And so, for example, Paul mentioned clean label. Over the years, we've all seen clean label and how people interpret clean label has changed. And so you need to change your guardrail and keep on top of consumer perceptions to be able to incorporate the consumer. And that's led to the generation of what are restricted lists, which many of us know are called now the no-no lists. And it's important to keep on top of what those are to see whether or not you need to modify your current guardrail to be able to encompass, the consumer perceptions. Next slide, please. I put a couple quotes in here because these quotes from the various agencies, be it the FDA, in this case, USDA, and the advertising division, give you an idea of what you should include in a guardrail on natural. So the FDA, the thing that jumps out to me on that one is something is considered artificial or synthetic if it's present and it would not normally be expected to be in the food. USDA introduces a very interesting term that's being used more and more, which is not more than minimally processed. And then the advertising division has had cases where they talk specifically about the source of the ingredient, in this case, synthetic vitamin C, where you might be able to call the product natural, but you can't call it all natural because the vitamin C is sourced synthetically. So those kinds of informations and quotes help to develop what I call the guardrail for natural, which is, if you go to the next slide, please. Putting these all together, and I'm going to talk about these individually in the next couple slides, but I consider three main areas when I'm looking at a process for natural. I look at the source of the ingredient, I look at the raw materials used in the process, and I look at the process itself. So let's go to the next slide where we talk a little bit about the source of the ingredient. Recall the FDA quote, not normally expected to be in the food. So a couple of the questions I ask more than one question about that addresses this, but the two that jump out to me is, does the ingredient that you're making and claiming to be natural exist in nature? And secondly, more importantly, is, do I normally consume that in the diet? There are some people who interpret that they can make an ingredient natural just by making it with a natural process. I don't hold to that. I believe if a consumer thinks if you're making something natural, that means you're making it a way that you're meeting something that I normally consume. So not only does answering these two questions go a long way to answer the FDA quote, but I believe it helps to address consumer perception of what's natural. And it helps you with the transparency of making a natural ingredient, and it avoids the pitfalls of false and misleading claims. The next part of my decision tree on the next slide talks about the raw materials. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this one because raw materials, there can be many raw materials in a process, some of which go directly into the targeted ingredient you're claiming to be natural, and others are used to facilitate the process. Talking first about the ingredients that become part of the targeted ingredient, I ask the question of all those materials that are going into making that natural, are they all natural? Natural in, natural out. And off to the right, I've listed what the FDA definition of natural flavoring is. But this is a place where, again, a company like CJ and other companies, when they're looking at processes like this, they need to have a very close connection with their vendors and be able to ask them, I'm buying this ingredient from you, I'm putting into a natural process. Can you verify for me that this is it fits the definition of natural? The second question, I'm bringing that one up because it has to do with other raw materials that may be used in the process. In addition, it talks about the flexibility of your guardrail. And I particularly brought up ozone because a couple decades ago, there was common practice that people were using ozone to chemically cleave molecules, and they were calling them natural. It became very apparent that such a process was not normally found in nature. And now it's commonplace to ask your suppliers the question, if you believe ozonolysis is being used to make one of your raw materials, that you want to ask the question that it's not being used anymore, because now we understand ozonolysis does not fit the definition of natural. And so this gets to other products and some things that Paul mentioned about electrolysis. I personally believe, and it's my opinion, even though you don't see electrolysis listed on a negative processing list, I think it would be just like ozone was decades ago, likely not acceptable, is no longer acceptable as natural. I think electrolysis would be a very hard sell to a consumer that it would be a natural process. So again, the guardrail needs to change as technologies come about. You need to ask those questions. The third question it gets to the question of what I'm going to call questionable processing, such as forcing a reaction to create chemicals not normally expected. I think this is really important for biochemical processes, such as fermentations. Sometimes people will add ingredients to a fermentation and it'll push the reaction in such a way that you're creating things that would not normally be created. So my rule of thumb in terms of organisms and fermentation processes is that you only add those raw materials that are needed in the amounts are needed for that microorganism to grow and to thrive. So that's it for the raw materials. And then the third one on the next slide is the idea about processing. Recall the USDA quote, they use the term minimal processing. This question, very rarely are you going to see any regulation that actually lists, oh, this process is natural, this process is not. And so you have to interpret and look to several sources for authoritative guiding principles, be able to assess your process. And I ticked off a few there. One is that's used very commonly, and you'll see it in European regulations as well. Is this a process that is traditionally used in food processing? So that's a very good guideline. Second one, is it a physical process? And this could be things like extraction or filtration versus a reaction that's caused by chemical addition. The third bullet I have there has to do with the overall FDA definition, which again is quite broad, but it gives you guidance to say processes such as distillation, roasting, heating, enzymolysis are considered natural processes. Beyond that, the flavor industry has a wonderful resource that it can go to for additional guidance in terms of minimal, and that is the International Organization of Flavor Industries. They have a code of practice for which there's a relatively large section on natural processes used for the determination of natural in those guidance. I tend to look to Canada sometimes when I need guidance. They actually are an authoritative body that in their regulation, they do have lists of processes. They call them minimal and maximal, and specifically with regard to natural. So that's a great resource that I have used over the years when I'm looking at a process for natural. And then again, you got to keep on top of it, back to the guardrails. So as USDA is particularly active in looking at claims for natural products. And so you'll see some of their decisions on a case-by-case basis. And so again, as technologies change, you have to keep on top of it to make sure that your guardrail is up to date with the latest technology and how an authoritative body might look at that for natural. So how does this all apply to the FlavorNrich natural cysteine, which is on the next slide? If I look at the natural cysteine, FlavorNrich cysteine, first question, is it found in nature? And yes, it is. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Cysteine is an amino acid. It's found in your body, and you consume it in many foods. You can check that one off the guardrail. The raw materials. In looking at the raw materials used in the manufacture of FlavorNrich cysteine, they are all natural. And indeed, not only are they natural, they're plant-based. So that's an additional advantage. All the raw materials that are used to sustain the fermentation are used at quantities required for the functioning of the microorganism, nothing excessive. And finally, the third, which has to do with the process. The process is one that is acceptable as natural. It uses traditional food processing, which is fermentation. That kind of processing, and I know of no regulation for which that is not considered a natural process. And subsequently, the process that to obtain the cysteine, further processing is a physical process of filtration. Again, not chemical, but if you look back to the minimal processing guidelines and where we've gone to get that, this would be considered a physical process and therefore would be acceptable. So in conclusion, on the next slide, the application of natural flavoring ingredient guidelines demonstrate, careful selection of raw materials accompanied by supplier verification of those raw materials, and the attention to processing conditions that are considered physical, minimal, and or traditionally used in manufacturing. The FlavorNrich cysteine is an ingredient commonly consumed in the body, and you commonly consume it. And it's made using a century-old food processing method. In my opinion, it meets all the guardrails that we've just gone through for a natural flavoring ingredient. And I saw the question about Europe as well. It does meet the guidelines for natural for Europe. So now, after that, thank you for your attention. I can turn this back to Ross.
Well, Nancy, hi, thank you for that. I'm not actually on my own here, you're still with me, but I wanted to actually say thank you. That was most informative. And actually also following your guardrail principle is very reassuring for manufacturers and consumers alike. So that is extremely helpful, and I'm sure that people will pick up on that. FlavorNrich Master C Cysteine, from your explanations, there is the only ingredient of its kind that can truly be called natural. It goes beyond nature identical. It's an ingredient that is actually found in nature and is something that people regularly consume. It's also produced through fermentation with 0 artificial reactants, and it meets no criteria of many advocate organizations. And these organizations would look for naturally pro-sourced ingredients, no artificial processed ingredients, no artificial preservatives, and most definitely no deceptive or ambiguous labeling. What's more, like all CJ products, our Cysteine is made with no animal ingredients and no animal cruelty. So what's more, I would like to actually turn this back to the Q&A. And Nancy, I think you can come back on and join me here, because I suspect some of these questions are going to be going directly to you. Okay, we have one question here. Difference between FlavorNrich versus other plant-based cysteines. The answer there would be, and from my listening to everything we've learned today, electrolysis is the difference. The actual process of electrolysis, which is passing electrical current so that it cleaves the molecule cysteine into cysteine, 2 molecules. And that is avoided by the FlavorNrich fermentation, which is a pure fermentation process, creating cysteine itself, and then membrane filtration. We're coming up with another one. Actually, the FlavorNrich is derived from plant sources, most definitely. So the question was, is FlavorNrich from plant-based? And yes, we actually use plant-based ingredients. In actual fact, it's sugar from corn. And I think we have yes, we actually had that correct. It is plant sugar sourced.
Ross, there's a question about the microbe. The microbe is not GMO. It's native. So you don't have to worry about GMO in terms of the microbe.
Thank you for that. I didn't see that one, Nancy.
I see another question on my opinion. It says the question is your opinion that a material that goes through an electrolysis process is artificial, or is it stated somewhere in the CFR in the US? And the answer is it's not stated in the CFR. In fact, you rarely see in the CFR a list of processes that are natural. That's why you have to do some interpretation, and you have to go with what I call the thou shalt not deceive regulation, which is misbranding and adulteration. My opinion is when you look at electrolysis, and I've done research as well as some of you have, I'm sure, where electrolysis is used, you'll see it in the purification of sludge and water. I do not consider electrolysis and passing current through something to be natural, but you won't see that in the CFR. And I've not seen it where any agency has ruled on it. I go back to the days of ozone. People were commonly using ozone decades ago, and over time, we just said that's not the right thing to do. And that's my feeling about electrolysis as well as CJ Bio.
Excellent, Nancy. Thank you for that explanation. That was great. And obviously you're being turned to for some more questions. I don't see any more coming up on the screen there. So maybe if you do have questions, you can send them to us, or we have a we have a email address at the end, last screen, which you can contact, and we will get back to you directly.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think, Ross, there was a question about the microbe grown on a non-source. I think that's one that we'll have to collect that question and turn that over to Paul and CJ, because I don't have the details of, that in front of me.
Okay, no, for sure. I think that's something that our experts can be more detailed on and actually provide that information more clearly.
Sorry, really quick. Somebody asked the question about, does it follow USDA organic guidelines? The answer is yes. We've looked at the NOP guidelines. The regulatory team at CJ and myself has looked as well. And we believe that, yes, it does follow the NOP guidelines for organic.
Okay, any final questions? Otherwise, I'm going to say thank you, Nancy. Oh, is this Cysteine a direct product from? I can't see the end.
Yeah.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Yes. Yep.
From what? I couldn't see the full question, sorry. Okay. Nancy, what was that from?
What was what from? Sorry.
The full question, it was what is Cysteine?
It just said, is this cysteine direct product from fermentation?
Ah, yes. Okay, absolutely. The question was most definitely yes. It's pure fermentation without electrolysis. That was very clear. Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate your time and thanks for your insight. It's great. Okay, everyone, I think we're ready to wrap up. There are no more questions, but as I say, here is the email address. Please get back to us and we will be there for answers. We will also share the requests for samples, etc., with our sales team, and they can communicate with you directly and get the samples out to you. Thank you very much and goodbye.